Okay, it is 4 o'clock, Tuesday, January 11th, 2022. I'd like to call the special meeting of the Harlan Municipal Utilities Board of Trustees to order. I need an approval of the agenda, please.
So moved.
I'll second.
Roll call.
Michelle, aye.
Terrell, aye.
Reese, aye.
Cybert, aye.
Sheldon, aye.
Okay. Agenda says, discuss disposal of telecom utility, referencing Steve Nadel's list of considerations and cautionary comments and HMU's policy regarding disposal of assets. I would like to make a note that the purpose of this meeting is to provide HMU Board of Directors with an opportunity to discuss the possible sale of the HMU telecom utility, to ask any questions they may have of the HMU staff or legal counsel to make that consideration possible. That's why we're here today. So I will start by saying that there was an unsolicited what would we
David,
call it? I'm sorry?
Matt Hudson.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to make sure that you could hear me because I will be speaking during the meeting and I couldn't make it in person. But I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing what's being said, but it's still audible. So I just wanted to make sure you knew I was here and that you could hear me when I spoke.
Yes, we can hear you.
We also have Steve Nadel on the phone, or on the Zoom meeting, so.
Yeah, he called in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
Steve, how are you?
Fine, thanks. I'm able to hear everybody just fine.
Okay, great.
Officially, what it's called is a proposal to acquire communication utility.
Okay.
That's how it's stated in the letter.
Once that was received, all of the members of the Board of Trustees had questions. As you can imagine, there was a lot of, this is uncharted territory for all of us, and we were told that have a group discussion on that required a meeting in open session was the only thing that we could do. So here we are, and the opportunity for the board members to ask any questions they may have is now.
So I'll just start. I kind of have three questions, really, three groups of questions. The first one is going to deal with where we were. The second is going to deal with where we are, and the third is going to deal with where are we going. So what brought us to this point were some items that were categorized in certain ways and things that may have been miscategorized or misinterpreted. So my question, the first question is, have we or can we address the issues that brought us to this point? Whether it's the application of depreciation, whether it's the subsidizing of one utility by the other, those are the two. Have we or do we have the ability as a utility to address those issues?
If I might respond?
Yes, you may.
Okay, I'm going to take my mask off so it's a little easier to understand. First of all, the first claim made was that the inter-utility loan was illegal. That was shown to be a false claim. We did that repeatedly, and it's based on Iowa code. The second claim was that the telecom utility lost money for several years, and we in fact brought the petitioner in twice and visited with him trying to explain that those unbudgeted expenditures were not related to ongoing operations and maintenance, that they were all related to unbudgeted CapEx as part of our fiber optic build-out, digital upgrade, and customer conversions. And as the board, well, the newer members won't recall, but basically when we committed to the fiber optic project, we committed to do it in 3 years versus 5, so that we would not have customers waiting 5 years while others enjoyed the benefit of fiber. So we did have those unbudgeted CapEx expenditures over a period of years. Each of those
recording in progress.
What was that?
I just hit it to record.
Okay, so each of those expenditures was addressed individually in board meetings, and they were all supported unanimously by all the board members at the time. to proceed with those various projects. So, as I said before, it was not operations and maintenance or the ongoing operation of the utility. It was one-time CapEx related to the expenditures on the fiber and the customer. So anyway, we did invite the petitioner in, we explained that to him, and the remark made was basically, that doesn't really matter what remarks were made at the point in time, but it was explained. And in addition to that, when we were contacted by the petitioner's attorney, basically making the same claims, our counsel addressed that with their attorney. Their attorney said, okay, we get it, I understand it. He offered to present that material back to the people that had signed the petition, and that offer was rejected.
So I guess, I don't want to get into the, he said, she said type thing. What I would ask is if, when we had the audit conducted and the auditing agency came in and made, I think it was on page 32, that they said, hey, the utility is losing money, this is a concern. Did they make that opinion informed of our acceleration of a debt to pay it off sooner? And if so, if they were informed of it and they still had that opinion, we may need to go back and talk and get clarification with that auditing firm to kind of eliminate that which has brought about this challenge, not whether this is legal or that was legal. So would we be willing to go back and talk to that auditing agency and say, hey, listen, based off of our acceleration of debt, would you still hold the same conclusion that the utility, the telecommunication utility, is losing money year over year? Because that's the root of where we're sitting right now.
Right. So we have conversations, in-depth conversations with the auditors every year.
Okay.
And in particular, whenever they identify anything that they believe is out of the norm or out of sync with what should be there. And so the auditors were made aware of what constituted those expenditures, why they were spent. But their limitation is they have to just look at the numbers.
Right.
And it's up to them how they qualify it. I can't tell them how to qualify it, how to explain it. It's their decision and their determination to make on how it's represented.
Yeah, so what I would offer is the utility, maybe the city, has the ability to go back pursuant to the audit and enter a corollary that addresses their finding. Did we do that with that audit?
No.
Okay, so I would suggest that maybe that's what we do, is we go in and we explain or rebut their findings. So I guess the next question really is, so thanks, that explains my first question. The second group of questions is, where are we now? So moving forward, have there been any changes that have taken place within the telecommunication line of business that makes what we are discussing today less pressing?
First of all, a couple of things that were going on. Prior to the petition being filed, we were actively engaged in discussions to provide wholesale operations or internet, video, and telephone services to other municipals in the area, southwest Iowa, basically. Once a petition was filed, and those would have potentially generated additional revenues with the wholesaler. Once a petition was filed, those discussions were placed on hold. One of the municipals that we were discussing with has gone with an alternate provider at this time because they didn't want to wait to see how this came out. But we were actively seeking additional opportunities to generate wholesale revenue. We did not do any significant marketing during the entire time that we were doing our construction, primarily because we would be advertising a service that wasn't available to everyone. And so we had intentionally held off advertising our upgraded digital services until we completed the customer conversion. And again, that marketing effort was put on hold once the petition was filed. So there may have been an opportunity to to promote the business and to build the business, but basically those activities were all placed on hold with the petition. So I don't know what alternate course may have occurred, at that point in time. The other thing to recall or to remember is that we came out of an accelerated 3-year build, and once we got through the build, then we started looking closer at that. And that would be the position taken going forward would be to manage the business more closely now that the CapEx has been invested into the utility. And understand that the basis of our customer service problems, when I first came on board, it was not unusual to have 6-8 service calls a night, trouble calls on the old system. And that was because of the old cable plant that was installed back when the utility were first constructed in the early to mid-90s. And that cable plant was built to provide analog cable TV. It was never built or constructed to provide the level of service that customers demanded. And so the bulk of our customer service problems when I came on board, I used the analogy several times for high-end users that have a lot of laptops, mobile devices, smart TVs, smart appliances, all that type of thing, as well as users or customers that are do consulting from home and that type of thing. Their demand is like what you would push through an 8-inch fire hose under high pressure. Our ability to feed that is like going through a drinking straw on the old cable plant. And so we tried to explain it the best we could that the only true solution was to upgrade the plant, make the digital conversion, install the fiber as the only feasible way to provide the services that our customers were looking for. And understand that all that occurred, I believe the first fiber was put in around 2012, and so all that has occurred in the last 8 or 9 years. All of that increased use, increased customer demand and everything else. And the other thing we had problems with on the old cable plant was it had amplifiers and power units that were prone to failure. We had ONTs on the outside of homes that didn't work when it was extremely cold or extremely hot. There was just a multitude of service issues on the old plant that couldn't be resolved regardless of how many additional components you installed or tried to ramp up the service. It was strictly limited by that old cable plant.
Yeah, so I think kudos to HMU in the past has made some solid investments, whether it's fiber to the homes or it's burying the transmission lines, and I think that's what the board's responsibility is moving forward. What I was asking really is, since this process began, HMU has not stood still, but actually as we look at this, what we're here to discuss today, HMU has actually warped ahead in service to be provided to the customer and possibly even pricing to be provided to the customer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So the third question is really moving forward, kind of alluded to it. At some point this board sat down and made a conscientious decision to invest in fiber. That investment paid huge dividends as we went through this pandemic and each child was pushed out of the school and expected to be able to remotely learn. That was a solid strategic investment. We went through a wind event not too long ago in which, because of the burying of the power transmission lines, I think you said briefed the board at one point that about a certain amount of customers lost power for 20 minutes while the rest of this part of the state was out of power from as little as 2 hours up to almost 2 weeks. So those are solid investments. As you look at telecommunications now and you look to the future, how do you see, or what do you see as the importance of telecommunications looking to the future, having seen how HMU has postured us to be successful by their actions in the past?
Let me qualify my answer by the fact that over the course of the years I've been here, we've had various discussions with board members and staff and others regarding the long-term viability of the telecom business. Broadband services, in whatever form you make it, is a vital part of life today. Whether it's provided over a fiber, whether it's provided wirelessly, whatever the case may be, it's a vital service. And the part of it is how are those services going to be delivered long term? And long term, I'm talking 10, 15 years out. Understand that I was engaged in the launch of digital telephone back in the late 90s. And that technology still has not reached all of the smaller rural areas at any level equivalent to what they have in the metropolitan areas. So if you extrapolate or make that same comparison on the broadband, even when the metro areas have a higher or more equitable level of broadbands, it's still going to be years before that reaches out into the smaller communities and the more rural areas. So until that time, we're still going to be a viable part of the local market. That's my perspective. That's my personal perspective. But it's based on what I've seen, industry trends and that type of thing. And I believe that's supported by the fact, when you look at the amount of money the federal, state, and local competitive providers are investing in fiber at this point in time, billions of dollars. So there is a belief out there that this has a long-term viable future, broadband services via fiber optics, because there's a huge amount of money being invested in it at this point in time and in the future.
So moving forward, my last question is, what benefit to the city and the customers and the citizens of the city is there in having control over their telecommunications?
Two things. First of all, HMU has been a municipal for years. It's always, the city of Harlan has always held the belief that they wanted local control of all their utilities. And, it goes back to, what was it, 1891? Something like that, where the first water system and everything else was put in place. I mean, it's a fabric within this community to be municipal. That's the long and the short of it. When the community determined by referendum they wanted to get into broadband services, telecommunications, they did so because they wanted a local presence and a competitive presence. Never was the word profitable part of the equation. They were looking for quality of service, level of service, local representation. And that was the underlying reasons for why HMU Telecom was launched in the first place. So I still believe that's the intention of the majority of the community, is that they want to support municipal utilities. And at this point in time, considering the emphasis that's been placed on communications, fiber in particular, I believe that should still be part of that municipal interest and municipal representation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And I have questions.
I just want to say that prior to being on the board, when we moved to town, we were on the old system. And I didn't think it was fair that the north end of town, or the other side of town of 12th Street, you have to have all the new fancy stuff, but the people on the east side of 12th Street got the crappy stuff. Our phone wouldn't work. I probably was one of the people that have 6 phone calls a night and the phone. And as soon as the board authorized it for everybody to get it, it was a blessing, because we do not have a problem with our phones. We do not have a problem with our TV, our cable, and I have 2 people in the house, 4 TVs going at once, computers going, and my phone's going, and have never had any problems since they upgraded with the cable. And the customer service has been great.
Thank you. The employees, thank you.
Nella, did you have anything you wanted to bring up at this point?
Well, about the only thing I wanted to bring up is we have to remember what the vote was for. The vote was not saying we have to sell the telecom. The vote said that the trustees of Harlan Municipal Utility, City of Harlan, in the County of Shelby, State of Iowa, be authorized to discontinue and dispose of the municipally owned communications utility by sale. Shall the Board of Trustees be given that authorization? It's not saying it's got to be sold. It just says we have the option if we want to. And I think everybody needs to realize that. You know, I think some people have the misunderstanding that this says we just have to sell it. And it doesn't say that.
I think that's a very important point to make.
Yep.
However, I also think it's a very important point for us to remember as a board that we have a responsibility to take this under consideration and make sure that we're making the right decision and not a decision based on our personal feelings or whatever. We have to think in terms of why we're here, which is to represent the city of Harlan. And in order to do that, we have to do our due diligence, which is the purpose of this meeting, is so that we can do our due diligence. Because legally, this is the only way we can work together as a group is an open session. So,
Are we supposed to represent the city of Harlan or all the people that come and complain to us and say they think they voted incorrectly?
Well, I will say this very distinctly to everybody that voted or did not vote. I have no idea why you voted the way you did, and I am in no position to ask all the people that voted what that decision was. All I can do is take the responsibility that was given to us, which is to analyze the circumstances and act in the best interest of the city of Harlan. So that's what we're going to do. There's no way that we can be tasked with the idea of determining what the voters' intent was. So.
But like, what was it, 600? And there's 5,000 residents in Shelby County?
Well, there's not 5,000 registered voters. So before we do the math, let's make sure that we remember that.
Well, let's
and
just
then
say,
when you think in terms of every election, our voter turnout is never 100%. So we always have to consider that the people that are willing to get out and vote will have the largest voice. So
is it possible that somebody could go out and do another petition to say, we don't want HMU to be sold, and so they get 100 and some people signed it, and we go back through this whole thing again?
There cannot be another referendum on the telecom issue for 4 years.
that being said, or do you have something to add?
I just, I think everybody's got to understand that the telecommunications business is changing day to day. 10, 15 years ago, Cat 5 was the thing to have. And now it's fiber. Next week it could be microwave. I don't know. But, it's going to continue to change. It's going to continue to evolve. You can see it every day. You get more advertisements for, streaming and this type of thing. So it's a very evolving and dynamic business to be in, and in a small community, they're making it very difficult. The Disneys, the ESPNs, the Paramounts, all of that, for us to be in this market on a competitive basis. And that is a huge concern going forward, I think. We've got to look at that. Right now, we are the largest provider in this community, and I think, that's a tribute to the service we provide, the quality of it, and everything else. And so we have a responsibility to all those customers out there to make sure that we continue to provide that. But how much longer, or this evolving, this whole question of is it going to be financially viable, that's going to become more challenging each and every day, I believe. And that's my biggest concern moving forward is, how much longer can we continue to keep up with this cutting edge technology that is an expectation out there?
do we have plans in place to
Well, just
improve? I mean,
maybe a couple of comments about the industry would, appropriate at this time. The first one is, as everyone's all aware, most of our younger customers or younger citizens of the community no longer use a landline. They all go mobile. That's a trend. Everybody's seeing it. Everybody providing broadband services is aware of it. Everybody suffers from it from the standpoint of the telecommunications. The one way that we tried to address that internally was in the early years of HMU, they were dependent on Walnut for telephone service. And they were paying a large monthly fee for analog services. And a few years back, we made a conscious decision to buy our own digital switch so that we could control our future in telecom. The reality is that the residential type users continue to decline as more and more people go wireless. That's, like I said, that's an industry trend. And on the commercial side of the business, is driven primarily by being able to also provide technology. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, but HMU never provided telephones to businesses. And most commercial businesses, that's part of what they want from their level of service. They want somebody who can sell the phones and service and maintain the phones. And we don't do that. That's always hurt us on the commercial side. So that's on the telephone. And I'm sure also everyone's aware of the video side of the business. The streaming, the younger, again, most of the younger customers, they'll pick a few channels, stream it for their kids and themselves, get a few local channels, sports channels, and they don't subscribe to the traditional cable TV. That's another industry trend. Even your wireless providers like Dish Network and stuff are starting to realize the significance of that. But I believe that exodus is more or less stabilized a little bit over the last few years, especially with the pandemic. People, for whatever reason, have been a little bit less inclined to go with Dish and are just kind of stabilized in the market. Where that goes down the road, I don't know, but prior to the pandemic, that was the trend. People would forego traditional cable and go with streaming services. So that leaves internet. And internet just continues to grow. We get new customers all the time for internet services. They're starting to want more and more, higher levels, data capability, that type of thing. So that's the future on the broadband services side is internet service. Everybody is aware that the other two services are declining. Now, one thing to clarify at this point is that the referendum is regards to the entire telecom utility, okay? HMU Telecom. The board has always had the authority to determine if they want to discontinue one of the services provided. So in other words, if the day came that telecom became a loser, the board could decide we no longer want to provide telephone. Same with cable TV. The board has always had that authority to look at it from a business case. But the position we took when we undertook the fiber build-out a number of years ago was let's get the fiber in the ground, let's resolve our service issues, and we'll see where we stand at the end of that and determine the path going forward. That's kind of the strategic point that we made several years ago. Let's get the fiber in the ground and get the technical and hardware issues resolved, and then see where we're at in that point in time on how to move forward.
so we do have the capabilities of moving forward with new equipment or new boxes, but we waited until after the vote to be able to roll anything else out.
Well, that's the part that's a little bit dicey from the standpoint of the lack of ongoing investment is why we're where we were back in 2012, because they had not made regular investments in upgrading the technology. And so it all came to a head about the same point in time where it was determined to move to fiber. The reality is, as was mentioned earlier, Technology is going to continue to change. I don't know what the cycle is, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. So there will be a future need to continue to make CapEx investments. And some of that will be driven by customers, some of it will just be driven by technology evolution. So that part of it is really hard to define. But there will be, to be able to maintain and keep our system up to date, it will require future CapEx investments on a regular basis.
So I guess, what you're talking about is the technology cycle, right?
Yes.
And it affects everybody. It doesn't just affect HMU. It affects the company that has a proposal on the table right now, or this interest on the table right now. We have to think what is best for the city and what's best for the company, or for not the company, but the customers. And if the technology curve that's facing us is facing everybody else, who's best postured to handle that technology curve? Meaning not just resources, but what's already in place. Not just money, but infrastructure and whatnot. The other thing is we got to this point because we thought a utility was being subsidized by another utility, right? So as we look across these other utilities or telecommunication companies that are, offering us a bid, short of a bid, they're heavily subsidized as well, right? So it's subsidization in a different manner. The other thing is that, I talked about it a little bit, controlling your own destiny is worth something, right? It comes with a price. The city has immense control over what happens with their telecommunications right now. And whether we disband some of it or part of it, or what if we were to merge with somebody? What if we were to pool our resources instead of trying to sell our resources? And we approached it from that way. I think what's in front of the board is a tabula rasa to say, hey, listen, what is best for the community and for the utility? It's not binary. It's not sell or don't sell. That requires us to sit down and do some work, to sit down and actually try to look at the future, to get smart on where telecommunications is going. Also to look and understand that we're not the only ones being affected by the technology curve. And then the big thing is controlling your own destiny. The city, you have a direct voice to this board. If this other company that's making an offer, they have one representative from this city, and then the rest are from the surrounding communities. So you're going to lose. You're going to lose your representation. You're going to lose your ability to control what it is that I believe is an essential requirement for a city that's moving into the technology or continuing to move into the information age. So I'm not saying it's one way or the other. It might be, COA might be COA 3, in which we go forward and we find somebody else to partner with, flatten that financial curve a little bit, and continue to offer great service without putting our folks into a monopoly bind. So
A monopoly, exactly. Monopoly.
Yeah. And we do already have a partnering agreement. It was originally with Walnut Communications, and it's currently with Marty Elkhorn. And we do still provide them video services. And my last conversation with them is they're in the midst of a fiber expansion project into their western communities. And that wholesale service, they are requesting that it be provided at least through 2024. So that would have to be a consideration to anything that the board does going forward.
Yeah.
But I just want to make the board aware, if you weren't already, that we do already have a partnering agreement with a local provider.
Yeah, I'm referring to an expansion of partnering. So for all I know, FMCTC comes to us and we partner with them selling. I mean, those are...
They were originally going to be a partner when the first concept came out on telecom. So.
Few questions. Going to go in a couple of different directions here. One of the purposes of this meeting was, in addition to whether we were interested in selling, was it even possible? So since we have the attorney on the phone, some of the questions, there seem to be some concerns about leasing our fiber to a non-tax exempt third party. Could somebody please explain what that challenge would be and if that's meaningful to the discussion?
Steve, that puts you up. If you could comment, as we talked earlier, about some of your concerns.
Certainly. So, in a 30,000-foot view, the issue is that when you have outstanding tax-exempt bonds, there are limitations regarding the extent of private use of the bond financed assets. So, and this applies to currently outstanding bonds and any future outstanding bonds. So this issue arises in a couple different contexts. First, the issue is, and I don't know if you have any outstanding bonds for the fiber system or if those bonds have all been paid off. But if you have currently outstanding bonds for the fiber system, and if you were to lease that fiber system to the entity which has submitted the proposal, that would create private use. We would need to measure it, but I suspect it would be well beyond the allowable amount, and that would require remedial action of the bonds, and that would also prevent issuance of future tax-exempt bonds for any improvements to that fiber system, which I understand is owned by the electric utility. So again, any currently outstanding or future bonds by the electric utility for the fiber system, the ability for those bonds to be issued on a tax-exempt basis would be jeopardized by leasing the fiber system for, or a portion of the fiber system for use by the other entity. The other issue that arises is you do have outstanding communication utility revenue bonds. And so if there were a sale of the utility, you would need, or the assets of the utility, you would need to engage in remedial action on those bonds. So ultimately, the issue is less whether you can do something than it is an issue of does it jeopardize your ability to utilize tax-exempt financing, and does it implicate currently outstanding bonds? And if you cannot use tax-exempt financing, you can always use taxable financing, but that comes customarily at a higher interest rate because the income tax, the interest earned by the purchaser of the bonds would not be exempt from federal income tax if you issue taxable bonds. So as a result, they require a greater interest rate to make them whole because they have to pay federal income tax. So that's the issue that you've just asked about.
Okay, thank you, Steve. While we have you, the next question I had was, are we even able to consider a single offer such as the one we have, or are we obligated to advertise for open bids?
I can't say that it's an all or nothing. I think it's a fact-specific analysis, but let me tell you some things that are applicable and which point towards what I'm going to call a competitive sale rather than only entertaining a single offer. But again, I'm not saying it's a black and white issue. But the things that I think point towards a competitive sale, number one, the board always has a fiduciary duty, and I think that would include making sure that you're getting the best price if you were to sell. And I think the only way to know that is through a competitive sale. Number two, you have a constitutional requirement to not use public monies for private purposes. And I think if you sell something below its fair market value or the reasonable amount that you could obtain for it, you're giving away the increment that you're not obtaining. And if you do that, so if you sell it for less than what you could get for it, you're gifting a portion of it, and that would be precluded by the Iowa Constitution. And the only way to know for sure is through a competitive sale. That's the only way to know for sure that you would be getting the maximum amount that you can receive. Now, are there scenarios where a competitive sale would not be required? I think we could probably determine a set of factual scenarios, and we'd want to go through more discussion. But this raises a point, just like a nuance. This is down in the weeds, but I think this drives home the point that you're making. And I want to reference the offer letter that was received. It indicates on page 2 in paragraph 2 that the offer price represents a premium above the highest valuation assigned to the utility. That offer price is $2,050,000. But I would point out that the appraisal from LWPJ says it's worth approximately $3 million, but you have approximately $2 million of debt obligations, and it nets to $1 million. But you understand what I'm saying? Under LWBJ's appraisal, if you were to get that price for it, you would receive approximately $3 million, you'd owe approximately $2 million, you would net $1 million if that appraisal were the selling price. Whereas under the proposal, if you receive $2,050,000 and paid approximately $2 million of debt off, you are barely breaking even, coming out with a little bit ahead, and that's alleviated or maybe taken away by the cost of the election and all of that. My point being that the statement that this is a premium above the highest valuation doesn't make sense when you look at the LWBJ appraisal. So I point that out just to kind of it's not my place to talk about whether it's a good or bad offer, and what the board wants to do in that regard, and whether, one potential purchaser is better than another. I'm simply pointing out a discrepancy between those words and one of the appraisals, and the point being, if you've got one of the appraisers who says it's worth $3 million, well, the only way to know if you're going to get that $3 million would be to put it out for competitive sale, because you certainly don't have an offer for that amount in front of you.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
This might be a good time for me to interject. This is Matt Hudson. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
I think it should be noted, and Ken is well aware of this, and so is the board, but there are innumerable contracts that I've reviewed over the last decade for the telecom. Many of those contracts, I don't know how many are in effect still. There's just been so many that I've reviewed. Many of them have non-assignment clauses. Many of them have penalty clauses if the contract is canceled. There's many of them that have all of that language and more that would come back onto HMU, whether they own the utility or not. And I can't even begin to put a price on what potential litigation might come from that. I can't even begin to put a price on how difficult it would be in the form of legal fees and HMU's efforts to try to decipher all of that. But I can tell you it is worth noting that there would be exposure if we were to have to cancel those contracts and they're not assignable. And virtually all of them that I've reviewed in my decade of doing this, there are assignment restrictions. So that's another factor that I think Steve is aware of also. And Steve, would you agree that this is an important thing to take into consideration?
Absolutely. An audit of all contracts would need to be made to determine all of the potential ramifications that you have mentioned, and that certainly factors in. Without knowing what all would be found, it's hard for me to comment beyond that, but the point is absolutely correct that there could be exposure there on depending on what those contracts say, on any number of them, and that factors into the economic analysis. And that's something which I would call maybe an unanticipated consequence. And while on that point, there's one other item that I think falls into that same category, which I'll mention, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Matt. Right now, there are certain costs that are spread out by HMU between all of its utilities, building, management, et cetera. Probably computer systems. I'm sure there are others. You know better than I what those are. If the communications utility were to cease its existence, you would have one less utility to spread out those costs, which means the remaining utilities would each bear a greater portion of that. So in actuality, I don't know the current economic status of the communications utility, so I'm saying this only in the abstract. If one were to ask me, is it a problem if one municipal utility governed by a board is breaking even, is that a problem? And my answer would be, well, it's paying a portion of the fixed costs, and if it stops existing, then it's more burdensome to the other two utilities. And as a result, that's the unintended consequence that I wanted to bring up, is that discontinuing the communication utility would create, to that degree, an increased economic burden on the other utilities. And that is not a subsidization issue. That is because the communication utility shares in certain fixed costs. And so that's along the same lines as what Matt was saying. I just wanted to point that out, that there are these unanticipated consequences that need to be thought through, or maybe unintended, that need to be thought through that impact the economics as well.
And I think that's, it's not my opinion or in position to make an opinion on what the board should do. But I think it is my position to let you know that the potential costs for the rest of the utilities that remain would be almost immeasurable. We could do an audit of all of the contracts that we're currently obligated under through the telecom, but I can assure you that every contract I have reviewed, which has to be in the hundreds, that relates directly to the telecom, is a contract that the entire utility is obligated by. Not one of them, in my recollection, specifically involved just the telecom. So the exposure in that regard could be, maybe it's the other side of the other party of the contract has no problem with it. Maybe all of them do. But it's like Steve said, we would have to do a massive audit just to find out what our exposure is financially, which, in my opinion, after being the one who's reviewed all of those agreements, would be enormous. Because not one of them is going to make exceptions for sale that I recall. Not one of them doesn't have some sort of prohibition against assigning it to another entity and the obligations they're under to another entity without having to jump through an enormous amount of hoops, or flat out saying this agreement is not assignable. So the board should be aware of that and the potential ramifications, which, like I said, I can't even begin to put a number on.
Mr. Chair.
But it would be obligations that would be borne by the utility in its entirety.
Okay.
If I can ask Mr. Nadel one more question.
Absolutely.
Steve, this is Ken. Do we have any update on the potential tax liability of the sale?
No, I do not have an update on that. We haven't looked at that. I didn't want to get too far into that unless the board wants to go down that path.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't want to dominate the questions if any of the other board members have something they'd like to add at this time.
I guess I just have one other comment, and I think one of the things that we haven't talked about is the telecom employees and how this is going to affect them. You know, a lot of them have been employees of HMU for a long time, and I think we need to think about them. We're thinking about what's best for the city and everything else, and they're also part of the city. And so I think we really need to think long and hard about them also.
I would hate to be them and have to go to bed every night thinking I'm not going to have a job the next day.
And I know we have to do what's best, but I think they're part of something that we need to consider also.
I think what we owe the employees, what we owe the utilities, what we owe the citizens, what we owe the mayor, is we owe them a plan. We don't have a plan. And so it is sad that if this were to come to fruition, people's lives would be affected. It's even sadder if it comes to fruition and we have no plan as to we know how we got here, what we're going to do in the future. I think there's a genuine need to sit down, and this board, with the help of the HMU, needs to come up with a plan. That's what we owe the city, not a fire alarm or a crisis response team. We owe them a plan. This piece of this referendum has empowered the board to come up with a plan for the telecommunications. Why not come up with a plan for the rest of the utilities and nest it within what the city is or may be aspiring to, nest it within what the county is trying to get after. That's really what we owe the employees and the citizens and ourselves as a board, is deliberate planning. So.
Are we just not here to vote if we're going to accept this?
No, we're not here to vote for that at all. We're here to do our due diligence before we can even consider such a vote, and we're far from that. There's two things that I want to point out about the most recent comments. As far as a plan goes, the plan is constantly being reevaluated with strategic planning when it happens, and there's been a number of plans that didn't go the way they were supposed to go. When I came onto this board 10 years ago, I thought the telecom was a potentially obsolete department and needed to be looked at seriously, and that we had to make a change and or we had to find a way to get rid of it. And I asked Ken in his interview, when I interviewed Ken the very first time, I told him this is something that we needed to look at. We needed to investigate the possibility of divesting the telecom utility. Everything that we're providing is potentially obsolete within the next 20 years. I ask you today, if the telecom switch required a major investment, would we make that investment?
Probably not.
Probably not
at the current level.
Okay, so then my next question is FMCTC even available to all the residents of Harlan? I mean, is FMCTC available throughout the entire city of Harlan for telephone? Does anyone know the answer to that? So anyone in Harlan has access to FMCTC now?
May I?
Yes, please.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
We don't have facilities to the side of every house, but we can adapt and overcome and make it work. We did that during the pandemic.
Okay. So basically what you're saying is that if our telephone switch required a significant investment or a problem came up, we would probably discontinue telephone service.
Well, the first option we would look at is moving it to a cloud service, because that's kind of the next level for telephone. And so we'd have to look at the viability of the telecom in relation to going to a cloud service.
We recognize that nationally over 62% of adults live in homes without landlines. It is a continuously declining area of what we're doing. So as time goes by, the telephone is going to fade away. More than likely, the same thing is going to happen to cable TV as the population ages and as streaming service becomes more and more available. The one crown jewel of what we have available is our broadband internet is outstanding. We have fantastic service, we have a great system. The question is, can we develop a viable plan to gradually phase the other two out and maintain the broadband internet without losing all of our customers in the process? Is that what the future holds?
I mean, how many 70-year-olds are going to be going out, running out and getting a cell phone?
Well, my mother certainly did.
I know a lot of them aren't, I mean, they won't even do my chart.
As time goes by, it's no different than the analog TV. At some point in time, the analog TV was just simply had to go away. And at some point in time, the telephone service is going to be obsolete at the home level. Businesses are going to continue to do business through the phone system for a lot longer than individuals are, but like we said earlier, we don't provide business service on that level, so that's not really an issue for us. So we have to recognize that this utility, yes?
When you're done, I think Curtis Dean would like to talk.
We do have, but
Or it's regarding telephone service.
David, on the telephone though, that's the one thing that is guaranteed, is that I or anybody that has a in-house telephone can pick that telephone up and know that it's going to have a ring there that you can dial 911. If there's cell phones out of battery, they couldn't pay their cell phone bills or their cell phones don't work, the one thing that's a constant is you can pick up a phone and call 911.
62% of Americans do not have home telephone service. That's just a fact. I built a brand new house 4 years ago. We didn't even put phone lines in. That's the future. So if we have to recognize that, and if we're not willing to recognize that, then we're basically, we're going blind into a future that we don't recognize, okay? We have to recognize that the future is different than what we are seeing today, and it's different than what it was. In 2004, 90% of Americans had a home phone. Today, it's what, 38%. It went from 90 to 38 in the last 18 years. Okay. This is the trends, and we have to recognize that those trends are going to continue, and we have to, as Jim said, we have to come up with a plan. And if that plan is to phase the obsolete portions out in favor of broadband, then we need to put a plan together to do that. But we have a unique opportunity. We've been given a unique opportunity to explore something that we've never been able to explore before. And that is the possibility that we aren't the best posture to provide the future for Harlan. Now, if we are, then we need to do that. But if we're not, this is the time to find that out. And that is the entire point behind this.
And I believe what we need to evaluate, part of any plan that we do for going forward, is that with diminishing number of telephone and cable TV users, and the fact that we currently are constrained by the city limits with a fixed population and customer base, is the internet broadband services viable as a standalone without the other two adding revenue? I mean, we really need to take a serious look at that long term, what we think the reality is.
So on our discussion here, we're going to decide today whether we're going to sell to...
No.
Okay.
No.
It says possible.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's always possible board action, but there's no possibility that we could. There's too much due diligence that would have to be taken no matter what the solution was. But at least we're a better understanding of some of the rules, some of the laws. We still don't have all of the information on the tax ramifications, but at least we recognize some of the other challenges, and that was the point behind this meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think moving forward, if we're even going to consider selling or breaking up whatever the options are, we've got to have a better idea of how many contracts are there out there.
Yeah.
What agreements do we have? Binding agreements, that type of thing. Because that was never in any of the other due diligence stuff that we've done, the appraisals, the assessments, and everything else. And we've got to have a better idea on that. How many contracts, how many agreements do we have? What is the ramifications? That's the big thing right there. We've got an idea on all the equipment. We know, we've got to get a better handle on long-term financing, replacement of that equipment, because that's something argued every time another piece of equipment comes before the board, where does this fit in the plan? There is no plan. We need a long-term capital plan there.
Yeah, and I think that equipment appraisal kind of brings to light the whole concept on this technology part of it. That being the fact that even though we may carry $3.5 million worth of equipment on the books, that's represents what we initially paid for.
Yeah. And it's worth $800,000.
And it's worth $800,000 based on the fact that, as we all know, usually when you buy a new computer or anything else, it's outdated when you buy it. Because the next generation is already under development or being out in beta test, whatever the case may be. And so even though the IRS is very restrictive on how we depreciate items, 3, 5, 7, 10 years, it's important to recognize, and I think that asset represents what the impact is on what you spend and what you have to spend and what the residual value is of those types of assets. I mean, they're never worth, 18 months down the road, they're never worth anywhere close to what you paid for them.
So I think there's a couple things. One is we're talking a lot about money, right, which is pretty important. And we started off this conversation with a clarification on, yes, we can't know what every voter wanted when they went in there and voted for this, that, and the other. But I think there's got to be a way to reach out to the community and get the community, whether it's SurveyMonkey or whatever, to have the community voice their concerns or address their desires, not their concerns, their desires moving forward. Meaning, what is it that, you have an opinion as a business owner, I have an opinion, you have an opinion, everybody else has, what do they need? What do they think they need moving forward? The money piece is, we've got to stop looking to ourselves as the only coffer to pay money or to bond these improvements or the advancements. We need to work into a plan. How do you go after grants? How do you go after things that allow a local community and municipal government to advance themselves? How do we do that? Not simply keep going back to the coffer with bond issues and trying to increase rates or worry about capital investments. It should be simply, do we have a resource strategy for this capital investment? Not, oh my gosh, we've got this huge capital investment coming at us. We can't afford that. No, we should be like, okay, do we have a resource strategy? If we don't have a resource strategy, then we have these discussions about whether or not we need to divest. We may be doing landlines that are obsolete, but guess what? There may be something else that is needed in the not too distant future that we may or need to offer. We need to ask that. We need to discern that as part of a plan. We just can't be, hey, only 62% of households have, or 62% don't have home landlines. Well, what else do they have? What are they relying on? Are they relying on, the cloud is not the cloud. The cloud is a warehouse full of servers. We talk about our reliable power here. Is that reliable power and our broadband, is that enough to bring in business? If that business were to come in, not a retail store, but a Google or something, is that marketable before we start, or what else do we need to do to make it more marketable? I think that's looking to the future, that's having a plan. It's not just, how do we divest? How do we legally divest? I think we're smarter, and our tenure here is long enough to be able to get after deep questions like that. So.
If I could offer up, Curtis Dean is online along with a couple of other municipal representatives, and he wanted to make a comment with regard to telephone. I might request that he can probably best address kind of this future vision that you're talking about, because that's his full-time work. If the board's interested, that would be an offer to allow Curtis to make a presentation.
Sure. And that's from his letter too?
Yeah, it follows more or less the line of his letter.
Okay.
Is that something the board cares to take it? Okay. Jenny, if you want to contact Curtis.
Curtis?
Yes.
Would
Can
you,
you guys hear me okay?
yeah, do you want to just go over your brief background for those that aren't at the meeting?
Yeah. Be happy to. Curtis Dean, and I wear several hats. I am a longtime municipal utility employee and advocate here in Iowa. Got my start in Spencer. I am formerly full-time employee at the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities, where I was the broadband services coordinator. And then 7 years ago, I started doing independent consulting, and I continue to provide advice and services to IAMU under contract, again, to help the 25 plus towns in Iowa that have a municipal telecom system like Harlan. I'm also a co-founder of an organization called the Community Broadband Action Network, which advocates for community-focused, community-owned broadband networks across the country. First thing I wanted to just address quickly is the discussion on telephone services. And what's really interesting in this day and age is that it is easy to get too bogged down in what investments may be needed on one technology or the other. Your telephone services, if your switch were to become obsolete at some point, and I doubt it will because it's fairly state-of-the-art and fairly new, there are plenty of other options out there, especially today, in providing voice services without owning your own switch. In fact, the past 3 or 4 municipal utilities that I've been involved with helping launch in Indianola, Pella, Vinton, New Hampton, and now in Fort Dodge, in none of those cases did those communities choose to own their own voice switch. They choose to partner for those services. So the bigger picture here, I think, is that when you look at TV services and you look at phone services, when you guys were built in 1994, you were built because the community wanted better cable TV, let's face it, and they wanted better phone service, so you did that. Internet was just a side thought at that time. Well, you're no longer a cable company and a phone company. You're a broadband company that provides voice and video services. Those are additions to your core business, which is broadband, fiber to the home, high-speed internet. And so you have an extremely valuable asset there that you can continue to leverage, not only to be responsive to what consumers need, whether it's they don't need phone anymore, but they do need this enhanced reality thing that's coming in the future. You are in a great position because you own that very, very valuable asset of that fiber to the home network, which will empower you to solve any of the solutions that are needed by your consumers. So I won't go into the letter that I sent you, but there's a lot of detail in there about why I think that this discussion is very important for you to have. But I also think it's vital that the utilities continue to be run and managed by the city. Remember, there are dozens of communities out there right now that would love to be where Harlan, Iowa is. Not only with a municipally owned system, but you actually have 2 viable, high-quality providers in your community. And that is simply not what's happening in most of Iowa. And for you guys to walk away from that, I think would be a huge disservice to your citizens and would be a bad step for the city of Harlan.
Any questions?
And I'll answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Bob Hogg would also like to speak regarding electric vehicles and distributed generation.
Okay.
Yes, thanks for giving me a minute here. My name is Bob Haug. I'm retired from being the director of the Iowa Association of Municipal Utilities, a position I had for 27 years. I'm no longer involved in telecommunication issues, but I still continue to work on electric transmission issues. And that's the point of my comment. In the future, Harlan residents are going to own a lot more electric vehicles. GM won't make any after 2023. It's about in the same position. In addition to that, rooftop solar is going to be more important to residents and businesses in Harlan. And as a result, the electric utility is going to need the fiber network to do system automation, advanced metering, and the other things necessary in an increasingly complex electric business. It's really hard to understate the value of having electric and communication services under the same roof. That's the comment I'd like to make, and hope you'll consider it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to tag on to that, if I could, as the future develops for EV and they do the charging stations and all that type of line, all of your commercial charging stations will require a fiber optic connection for the billing and processing and that type of thing. So.
I have one other question I'd like to ask. What is our current video plant? What would you consider end of life? Are we 5 years away, 2 years away, 10 years away?
For what?
For our video equipment and such. When are you going to be coming back to the board asking for a significant upgrade?
How long, are you saying how long is video product going to?
Our current video equipment, at what point are you going to come to the board and say it's reached end of life and we have to borrow money in order to get to the next generation?
There's no current lifespan put on it. What we've got there can last a long time. We invested in 2015 on it, so what's going to happen is the larger national providers are going to evolve the video product, and what we have now at some point will be phased out to streaming services. So,
If I might tag along.
What we have is a good delivery system. Is we can go another 5-10 years, or
that was the number I was looking for. So
it's not been. There's still a large number of providers across the United States that deliver the same way we do.
And all of our satellite receivers are being upgraded with regard in relation to the C-band project.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all new technologies. So.
Well, we certainly have a lot of things to consider, and a lot of things that I would imagine nobody in this room was expecting. All the things that came up today, I certainly wasn't.
I wouldn't either. I didn't realize about all the contracts.
Any other questions from the board that we would like to get answered while we're here? This is a special meeting for that purpose, so.
Can I don't have a question, but I would like to state something.
I really intended not to open this up to the public.
Oh, okay.
Because that could go on for hours, and that was not the intent of this meeting. Before such a time as we were to make a hard decision and vote on something, I'm sure that type of meeting would be made, but that was not the purpose of today. So unless you have a direct connection to the HMU legal counsel or something, I would prefer to keep it just to the board today. Jen?
Curtis Dean would like to speak again if possible, or do you want to?
Curtis, yeah, you're fine.
Just real quickly, I just want to let you guys know you do not operate in a vacuum. The issues that you're facing and will face in the years to come are the same issues being faced by every small community-owned, community-focused broadband provider out there. And those people are out there, and they would like nothing better than to see Harlan be successful, myself included. We have several people on this call tonight, which you won't be able to get to, who are part of some of those municipal broadband utilities. And we here in Iowa have a nice little family of telecoms that we share information, we share resources, and share best practices. Do not be afraid to call upon those people along with some of your great other resources like Consortia Consulting to help you evaluate your options and to help you make the best decisions for the citizens of Harlan. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we want to try to address how we want to move forward now?
That would be nice. I'm not sure where we stand on that, other than the telecom committee is made up of, who's my telecom committee?
You and me.
You and,
I thought I was.
no, I'm not on it.
Yeah.
I'm only there.
No,
if-
let's
Yes, right. electric, gas, and water.
I guess I wondered if we would be looking at developing a plan and seeing where we could go in the future.
I certainly think that sounds appropriate, so I would love to hear back from the telecom committee, since we can't meet as a whole group like that. The telecom committee, would be nice to have a report at our next board meeting.
Great.
And talk about what you guys think.
Like the end of the month
Yeah.
board meeting?
Yeah, we're obviously in a position where we have a time factor on the current offer. If we're going to seriously consider it, there's no possibility we're going to meet that time frame. So obviously, we're going to have to ask for an extension if we're going to actually consider that. But in the meantime, we need a plan, and our mechanical way of doing that is through the telecom committee. So.
But with these evaluations, this didn't even come.
That's not for,
Okay.
That's for discussion for another day.
Okay.
So,
If I could request that be extended to the February board meeting, only because we're currently involved in budget, which is going to take up most of our time from now until the Monday before the board meeting.
I don't mind extensions to a point. However, I do believe this is a timely and important topic that we're covering here. How quickly do you think you would be ready to report to the board? Should we do February's first meeting in person so that we have the time?
That would probably be good.
That would probably be more viable than the end of this month.
Okay.
Yeah, let's look at doing that, making the first meeting in February.
So the first meeting in February will be an in-person meeting, and we will hear from the telecom committee at that time. Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board?
Motion to adjourn.
Ken, anything?
I don't have anything else to add at this time.
All right. I'm glad we'll just say that we are adjourned. Motion to do so. Thank you, everyone, for
If I
joining.
could make one comment, though. First of all, we appreciate everybody coming tonight. And even if you weren't able to present tonight, if you could perhaps put your comments in writing and submit them so we can consider them at the next board meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.